Carbon credit, the billion-dollar greenwashing scam. For years, you've been fed a comforting narrative, a story about carbon credits, about saving the planet, about corporations nobly doing their part. We've been told it is about cleaner air, about a sustainable future for all of us. But what if that story is a meticulously crafted illusion? What if, behind the green facade, trillions of dollars are not just changing hands, but actively being siphoned, making the wealthiest institutions exponentially richer? This isn't about climate action. It is about a multi-billion-dollar financial market, a speculative playground where the right to pollute becomes a commodity. And while they celebrate their net zero pledges, the real cost, the true environmental burden, is still being paid. Not by them, but by you and the planet. The illusion of emissions reduction. The official story, the one propagated by governments, megacorporations, and even some well-meaning environmental groups, is elegantly simple. Carbon credits are a tool, a mechanism designed to quantify and offset carbon dioxide emissions, allowing businesses to compensate for their unavoidable pollution by funding projects that reduce or remove an equivalent amount of greenhouse gases elsewhere. One credit, 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalent, removed or avoided. It sounds like a clean, market-based solution to a global crisis. It sounds like progress, but the truth, as always, is far less palatable. Behind the polished reports and the enthusiastic press releases, the reality of carbon credits is often less about genuine environmental remediation and more about an intricate accounting trick. It is a shell game, expertly played on a global scale, where the primary beneficiaries are rarely the environment itself, and certainly not the average citizen. Instead, the real winners are those who understand how to manipulate the system, how to create value out of thin air, and how to sell the illusion of change. Consider the bedrock principle upon which the entire carbon credit market is supposedly built: additionality. This concept dictates that, for a project to generate valid carbon credits, the emissions reductions or removals it achieves must be additional to what would have occurred in the absence of the carbon credit financing. In simpler terms, if a company funds a forest preservation project, those trees must be saved because asterisk of the carbon credit money, not because they were already protected by law, or because the landowner had no intention of cutting them down anyway. This is where the first, gaping chasm opens between rhetoric and reality. Proving additionality is notoriously difficult, almost impossible to verify with absolute certainty. It requires peering into an alternate timeline, confirming a counterfactual scenario. How do you definitively prove that a solar farm wouldn't have been built, or a forest wouldn't have been preserved, without the revenue from carbon credits? The answer, more often than not, is that you cannot. And this inherent ambiguity has become a breeding ground for what can only be described as systemic fraud. Projects that were already economically viable or even legally mandated suddenly find themselves eligible for carbon credit funding. A hydroelectric dam planned for decades, its construction already underway, miraculously becomes an additional emissions reduction project, generating millions in credits. A tract of forest, protected by indigenous communities for centuries, suddenly becomes a candidate for carbon credits, with external entities claiming the additionality of its continued existence. The cui bono lens immediately illuminates this deception. Who benefits when a project that would have happened anyway receives carbon credit funding? Not the environment, which sees no new reduction. Not the public, which pays for an illusion. It is the project developers, the brokers, and the corporations that buy these credits to greenwash their ongoing pollution. They gain a financial windfall and a public relations shield, all without actually moving the needle on global emissions. This is institutional decay at its finest, where the very rules designed to ensure integrity are so porous that they invite exploitation. The system, designed to incentivize real change, instead incentivizes creative accounting and the fabrication of impact. Then we encounter the equally insidious problem of double counting. Imagine two separate entities claiming the exact same ton of carbon reduction. It sounds absurd, yet it happens with alarming regularity within the opaque labyrinth of the carbon market. This can manifest in several ways. Perhaps the country where a carbon reduction project is located claims the emissions reduction towards its national climate targets, while simultaneously, the project developer sells carbon credits for those same reductions to an international corporation, which then claims them towards its own net zero goals. This is not merely an oversight. It is a fundamental flaw that allows for the inflation of perceived climate action without any corresponding real-world impact. Another scenario involves a single project generating a set amount of carbon reductions. The entity that initiated the project might claim these reductions as part of its own environmental performance. Simultaneously, it sells carbon credits representing those very same reductions to another company, which then also claims them. This effectively means that 1 ton of reduced carbon is being counted as 2, or even more, in various ledgers and public statements. The numbers look good on paper, the targets appear to be met, but the atmosphere remains indifferent to these financial sleights of hand. The consequences of this double counting are profound. It creates a distorted picture of global climate progress, leading policymakers and the public to believe that more is being done than is actually the case. It undermines the credibility of the entire carbon market, turning it into a mechanism for creative accounting rather than genuine environmental stewardship. From the perspective of the mass psychology expert, this serves a crucial function in the narrative war. It generates a sense of false hope and complacency, effectively diffusing public pressure for more aggressive, verifiable action. People are told that solutions are in place, that corporations are doing their part, and that the market will solve the problem. This carefully constructed narrative allows the institutional decay to fester, as the very systems meant to hold polluters accountable are instead co-opted to serve their financial and reputational interests. The illusion of emissions reduction is not a bug in the carbon credit system. It is, in many ways, a feature. It allows for the appearance of action without the burdensome cost of actual transformation. It provides a convenient escape hatch for industries under pressure, a financial instrument that can be traded, leveraged, and ultimately used to maintain the status quo while projecting an image of environmental responsibility. This is the subtle, cynical reality beneath the surface of what is presented as a global climate solution. Wall Street's newest asset class. If you thought carbon credits were solely about saving the planet, you missed the memo from Wall Street. Because in the cold, calculating world of high finance, a carbon credit is not a promise of a cleaner future. It is merely another speculative asset. It is a commodity stripped of its environmental pretense to be bought, sold, traded, and leveraged, just like oil futures or gold. This fundamental shift from an environmental solution to a financial product is perhaps the most critical understanding required to truly grasp the cynical mechanics at play. The journey of a carbon credit from a theoretical reduction in emissions to a tangible financial instrument is a fascinating and deeply troubling one. Once a project is verified, and as we discussed, that verification is often tenuous at best, it generates these credits. These credits are then listed on exchanges, bundled into funds, and traded by an array of financial behemoths. We are talking about major investment banks, aggressive hedge funds, and sophisticated brokers who have found a new frontier for profit. They are not in this game to sequester carbon. They are in it to generate returns. The cui bono lens reveals the undeniable truth. The primary beneficiaries of this burgeoning market are not the communities struggling with pollution, nor the ecosystems being degraded. It is the financial intermediaries. They facilitate the trades, they manage the funds, they devise the complex derivatives built upon these credits. Each transaction, each fluctuation, represents an opportunity for fees, commissions, and arbitrage. Imagine a market where the underlying asset is an invisible gas, whose reduction is difficult to prove, and whose value is determined by an ever-shifting landscape of policy, public sentiment, and pure speculation. This is not a stable market. It is a casino, and the house always wins. The sheer scale of this financialization is staggering. Estimates place the global carbon market at hundreds of billions of dollars annually, with projections suggesting it could reach trillions in the coming decade. This is not pocket change. This is a significant portion of global capital being directed into a system that, by its very design, invites opacity and manipulation. Unlike traditional commodities with tangible physical properties, the value of a carbon credit is inherently abstract. It is a promise, a certification, a bureaucratic construct. This abstraction makes it uniquely susceptible to market volatility. Prices can swing wildly based on regulatory changes, geopolitical shifts, or even just the latest pronouncements from international bodies. This unpredictability is a nightmare for genuine environmental planning, but a goldmine for speculative traders who thrive on volatility. The lack of transparency is another critical flaw, a hallmark of institutional decay. The verification processes for carbon projects are often complex, inconsistent, and sometimes even compromised. There are numerous standards and registries, each with its own methodologies, creating a fragmented and confusing landscape. This fragmentation makes it incredibly difficult for external auditors, or even regulators, to get a clear, unified picture of the market's integrity. When you cannot easily verify the quality or legitimacy of the underlying asset, the entire market becomes susceptible to fraud and overvaluation. This opacity is not an accident. It is a design choice that benefits those who operate in the shadows, allowing them to exploit informational asymmetries and capitalize on the confusion. This brings us to the inevitable conclusion: the creation of a carbon bubble. Just like the dot-com bubble of the late 90s or the housing market collapse of 2008, a speculative bubble forms when the market value of an asset becomes fundamentally detached from its intrinsic value or underlying reality. In the case of carbon credits, the intrinsic value is the verifiable, additional reduction of greenhouse gases. But as we established in our previous segment, the reality of additionality and double counting means that many credits represent little to no actual environmental benefit. The market, however, continues to assign them value, often at increasing rates, driven by corporate demand for greenwashing tools and speculative interest from financial institutions. Corporations need these credits to meet their net zero pledges, to satisfy ESG investors, and to polish their public image. This demand, coupled with the speculative fervor of Wall Street, inflates prices, creating an artificial economy around a largely fictitious environmental impact. It is a classic bubble scenario where the price is driven by perception and future expectation, rather than concrete, verifiable worth. The danger of this carbon bubble is not merely financial. When it inevitably bursts, the fallout will extend far beyond the balance sheets of hedge funds. It will shatter public trust in market-based climate solutions, further entrenching skepticism about the very concept of environmental action. The narrative war will suffer a devastating blow as the public realizes they have been sold a false promise, a financial charade disguised as climate salvation. This institutional decay will accelerate, as the credibility of the organizations, both public and private, that champion this system will be irrevocably damaged. The financialization of carbon has transformed a critical environmental challenge into a playground for profit. It has created a system where the incentive is not necessarily to reduce emissions, but to generate and trade credits. And in this system, the only thing truly guaranteed to grow is the wealth of those who understand how to navigate and exploit the intricate, often opaque, world of Wall Street's newest asset class. The planet, meanwhile, continues its struggle, largely unaffected by the billions changing hands in this elaborate, green-tinged financial game. The greenwashing gambit. Having explored the illusion of actual emissions reduction and the cynical financialization of carbon credits, we now turn our attention to the most visible, yet perhaps most insidious, aspect of this entire charade: the greenwashing gambit. This is where the carbon credit market truly weaponizes mass psychology and leverages institutional decay to create a pervasive narrative of corporate environmental responsibility that is often diametrically opposed to reality. You see it everywhere. The airline declaring its flights are carbon neutral, the energy giant touting its net zero aspirations, the consumer brand proudly displaying its eco-friendly badge. These are not merely marketing slogans. They are carefully constructed elements of a narrative war designed to shape public perception and provide a shield against genuine accountability. The core of this gambit is simple. Corporations buy carbon credits, often from projects of questionable integrity, not to fundamentally alter their polluting operations, but to maintain them. It is cheaper, easier, and far less disruptive to purchase a certificate claiming an offset than it is to invest billions in overhauling energy-intensive infrastructure or fundamentally redesigning supply chains. The cui bono lens here is crystal clear. Who benefits? The corporations themselves. They get to continue business as usual, avoiding the immense capital expenditure and operational challenges of true decarbonization. They gain a veneer of sustainability, placating increasingly environmentally conscious consumers, satisfying ESG, environmental, social, and governance investors, and deflecting regulatory pressure. For a relatively small investment in carbon credits, they purchase a license to continue polluting, all while reaping the public relations benefits of being seen as a responsible corporate citizen. This is the ultimate cynical arbitrage, exchanging the costly burden of real change for the cheap currency of perceived virtue. Let us dissect the net zero illusion, a term that has become ubiquitous in corporate boardrooms and international climate discussions. On the surface, net zero sounds commendable. A company reduces its emissions as much as possible and then offsets any remaining unavoidable emissions. The problem lies in the offsetting part. As we discussed, many of these offsets are derived from projects that lack additionality, suffer from leakage, or are simply overestimated. A company might declare a net zero by 2050 target, which sounds ambitious, but then proceed to buy millions of cheap, low-quality carbon credits, effectively kicking the can down the road while continuing to emit vast quantities of greenhouse gases today. Genuine decarbonization would mean a radical transformation of operations, switching to renewable energy sources, electrifying fleets, optimizing manufacturing processes for efficiency, and developing circular economy models. These are difficult, expensive, and require fundamental shifts in corporate strategy. Offsetting, on the other hand, allows companies to avoid these hard choices. It is the climate equivalent of buying indulgences in the medieval church, paying a fee to absolve oneself of sins, rather than fundamentally changing one's behavior. The mass psychology expert understands that this illusion preys on a public desire for simple solutions and a belief in the inherent goodness of large institutions. People want to believe that the problem is being handled, and corporations are happy to provide that comforting fiction. The public perception versus actual environmental footprint gap is widening into a chasm. Corporations deploy sophisticated PR campaigns, spending vast sums to broadcast their green credentials. They highlight small, often symbolic, environmental initiatives while obscuring the vast majority of their operations that continue to contribute significantly to climate change. We see glossy advertisements featuring wind farms or tree planting projects, rarely the oil rigs, coal mines, or manufacturing plants that constitute the core of their business. This is the narrative war being fought on a grand scale, where the battleground is public opinion, and the weapon is carefully curated information. The institutional skeptic cannot help but notice the complicity of various actors in this greenwashing gambit. Rating agencies, sustainability consultants, and even some non-governmental organizations often play a role in validating these net zero claims and carbon credit purchases. Their stamp of approval, however tenuous, lends legitimacy to practices that might otherwise be exposed as fraudulent. This is a clear indicator of institutional decay, where the very entities meant to provide independent oversight become integrated into the system they are supposed to regulate, often driven by financial incentives or a misguided belief in the efficacy of market-based solutions. Consider the example of an airline that declares its flights carbon neutral. This sounds impressive, but what does it actually mean? It means the airline has purchased carbon credits to offset the emissions generated by its jet fuel. It does not mean the planes are suddenly flying on sustainable aviation fuel, or that the airline has fundamentally reduced its emissions from its core business. It means they have paid someone else somewhere else to claim a reduction that may or may not be real, while their own emissions continue unabated. The passenger, feeling good about their carbon-neutral journey, is none the wiser, and the pressure for the airline to truly decarbonize is lessened. This widespread adoption of greenwashing, facilitated by the carbon credit market, has several devastating long-term consequences. Firstly, it creates a false sense of progress, delaying the urgent and radical action required to avert catastrophic climate change. If everyone believes net zero is being achieved through offsets, the political will for more stringent regulations or direct emissions reductions dissipates. Secondly, it erodes public trust. As the true nature of these schemes becomes more widely understood, cynicism towards all environmental initiatives will grow, making it harder to rally support for genuine solutions. This is a critical blow in the narrative war, as the public becomes desensitized and skeptical of all claims, even legitimate ones. Ultimately, the greenwashing gambit is a testament to the power of perception over reality, and the willingness of powerful institutions to exploit that gap for profit and public appeasement. It is a sophisticated form of deception, cloaked in the language of sustainability, that allows the wheels of industry to keep turning, largely unburdened by the true environmental costs they incur. The carbon credit market in this context is not a solution, but a lubricant for continued environmental degradation, disguised as salvation. The global land grab, forests, indigenous rights, and carbon. We have peeled back the layers of illusion and financialization, exposing the carbon credit market as a sophisticated mechanism for greenwashing and speculative profit. But the story darkens considerably when we examine its tangible impact on the ground, specifically the profound social and geopolitical consequences of what has become a global land grab, cloaked in the noble guise of environmental conservation. The escalating demand for carbon credits, fueled by corporate net zero pledges and financial speculation, has triggered an unprecedented surge in large-scale land acquisition. Corporations, investment funds, and even some powerful international NGOs are aggressively buying or leasing vast tracts of land, primarily in the global south, across Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. These lands, often rich in biodiversity and critical for carbon sequestration, are being earmarked for massive reforestation, afforestation, or avoided deforestation projects. On paper, it sounds like a positive development, planting trees, protecting existing forests, combating climate change. But the reality for the people living on and around these lands is far more brutal. The cui bono lens immediately highlights the beneficiaries of this new colonial rush. It is not the indigenous communities who have stewarded these ecosystems for millennia, nor the local populations whose livelihoods depend on access to these resources. Instead, it is the external entities, the carbon project developers, the land brokers, and ultimately the corporations in the developed world who purchase the resulting carbon credits. They gain control over millions of hectares, not for their intrinsic ecological value to local populations, but for their capacity to absorb carbon and generate tradable offsets. This is a clear transfer of wealth and power, often from the marginalized to the powerful, under the banner of climate action. The most egregious consequence is the widespread displacement of indigenous communities and local populations. These communities, often without formal land titles or with customary land rights unrecognized by national legal systems, find themselves vulnerable. Their ancestral lands, which they rely upon for food, water, medicine, and cultural heritage, are suddenly reclassified as carbon sinks or conservation areas. They are evicted, sometimes violently, from their homes, denied access to their traditional hunting grounds, farming plots, or sacred sites. The irony is stark. The very people who have historically been the most effective guardians of these forests are being removed in the name of saving them. Consider the narrative war at play here. The rhetoric surrounding these projects is invariably positive: sustainable development, community engagement, empowering local populations. Yet, numerous investigative reports and human rights organizations document a consistent pattern of coercion, intimidation, and outright human rights abuses. Local populations are rarely consulted genuinely, and their consent is often manufactured or entirely absent. Promises of jobs or alternative livelihoods often fail to materialize, leaving communities impoverished and dispossessed. This is institutional decay made manifest, where the institutions designed to protect vulnerable populations are either complicit or utterly ineffective in the face of powerful economic interests. This is not merely about land. It is about control over vast natural resources. When a foreign entity acquires millions of hectares for carbon projects, they are also acquiring de facto control over the water sources, the mineral rights, and the future development potential of those regions. These lands are often locked into long-term contracts, sometimes for decades or even a century, effectively privatizing what were once common resources. This fundamentally undermines the sovereignty of nations and the self-determination of local peoples. The land becomes a factory for carbon credits, its primary purpose reoriented to serve the distant demands of polluting industries in the global north. The colonial aspect of carbon offsetting cannot be overstated. It echoes historical patterns of resource extraction, where raw materials were taken from the global south to fuel industrialization in the north. Now, it is carbon sequestration capacity that is being extracted. The wealthy nations and corporations, having industrialized at great environmental cost, are now effectively outsourcing their climate responsibility to poorer nations. They pay for the right to continue polluting in their own territories by funding projects that restrict land use and dispossess communities thousands of miles away. This is a 21st century form of colonialism, green-tinted but no less exploitative. The institutional decay is evident in the weak land governance systems prevalent in many developing countries. Ambiguous land laws, corrupt local officials, and a lack of transparency create fertile ground for predatory land deals. Governments, often desperate for foreign investment or swayed by powerful lobbying, sign away vast areas without adequate due diligence or consideration for the rights of their own citizens. The carbon credit market, rather than rectifying these systemic weaknesses, actively exploits them, turning a blind eye to the social injustices inherent in its supply chain. Moreover, the long-term ecological impacts are often overlooked. Monoculture tree plantations, favored for their efficiency in carbon sequestration, often replace diverse natural forests, leading to a loss of biodiversity and rendering ecosystems more vulnerable to disease and climate shocks. These plantations may not provide the same ecological services as natural forests, further exacerbating local environmental problems even as they generate carbon credits. The focus on quantifiable carbon metrics overshadows the complex, holistic health of ecosystems and the people who depend on them. In essence, the global land grab for carbon is a stark illustration of how a market-based solution, ostensibly designed to address a global crisis, can inadvertently, or perhaps intentionally, perpetuate and even exacerbate existing inequalities and historical injustices. It transforms the fight against climate change into a new battleground for resource control, wealth accumulation, and the subjugation of vulnerable populations. The benevolent image of conservation and sustainability becomes a powerful weapon in the narrative war, masking a profoundly cynical and destructive reality. Regulatory capture and the shadow lobby. We have systematically dismantled the public facade of carbon credits, revealing them as an illusion of emissions reduction, a speculative financial asset, and a powerful tool for corporate greenwashing and land appropriation. But none of these machinations would be possible without a critical, often unseen, mechanism at play: regulatory capture and the pervasive influence of a shadow lobby. This is where the institutional decay becomes most starkly evident, where the lines between public interest and private profit blur into an indistinguishable, corrupt haze. Regulatory capture, for those unfamiliar with the term, is not merely lobbying. It is a more insidious process where a regulatory body, ostensibly created to act in the public interest, instead advances the commercial or political concerns of special interest groups that dominate the industry or sector it is charged with regulating. In the context of carbon markets, this means the very rules, frameworks, and enforcement mechanisms designed to ensure environmental integrity and market fairness are often crafted, or at least heavily influenced, by the very energy and financial giants who stand to profit immensely from a lax or favorable system. The follow-the-money auditor persona finds ample evidence of this influence. Billions of dollars are channeled annually into lobbying efforts. Major oil and gas companies, multinational banks, and powerful industrial conglomerates are not merely advocating for their interests. They are actively shaping the legislative landscape and the specific regulations that govern carbon markets. They fund think tanks that promote market-based solutions. They employ legions of former government officials as lobbyists, and they contribute heavily to political campaigns. The goal is clear: to ensure that any regulatory framework for carbon credits is designed not to genuinely curb their emissions or restrict their profits, but to facilitate their continued operations and provide them with new avenues for financial gain. Consider the intricacies of carbon market design. Who sets the rules for what constitutes a valid carbon credit? Who defines additionality and leakage? Who oversees the verification bodies? The answers often lead back to committees, working groups, and international forums where industry representatives hold disproportionate sway. They argue for flexibility, for market-driven solutions, and against onerous bureaucracy. These seemingly innocuous terms are often code for loopholes, weak enforcement, and opportunities for self-regulation, all hallmarks of institutional decay. The result is a system riddled with ambiguities that are then expertly exploited, as we have seen with the issues of double counting and non-additional projects. This brings us to the infamous revolving door phenomenon, a clear indicator of systemic corruption. Individuals move seamlessly between high-level positions in polluting industries or financial institutions and key roles within government agencies, regulatory bodies, and international climate organizations. A former executive from a major oil company might become a senior advisor in an environmental agency, or a former regulator might join a lobbying firm representing the very industries they once oversaw. This constant exchange of personnel creates an ecosystem of shared interests, personal relationships, and a deep, unspoken understanding of how to navigate and influence the system from both sides. The implication of this revolving door is profound. It means that the individuals responsible for writing and enforcing the rules often have a prior, or even future, vested interest in the industries they are regulating. Their perspective is shaped by corporate priorities, not necessarily by the impartial pursuit of environmental justice or public good. This is not always about overt bribery. It is often about a more subtle, yet equally damaging, intellectual and cultural capture. The prevailing ideology becomes one that prioritizes market solutions and corporate flexibility, even when those approaches demonstrably fail to address the climate crisis effectively. The institutional skeptic sees this as an inevitable consequence of power unchecked, where the guardians become indistinguishable from the gatekeepers. The outcome of this regulatory capture is a carbon market characterized by weak enforcement mechanisms and a heavy reliance on self-regulation. Many carbon credit standards and verification bodies are themselves private entities, often funded by the very industries whose projects they are meant to scrutinize. This creates an inherent conflict of interest. How rigorously will a verifier audit a project if their continued business depends on maintaining good relations with the project developer? The incentives are perverse. Rather than robust oversight, there's a drive towards facilitating transactions and maintaining market liquidity, even at the expense of environmental integrity. The rules, when they exist, are often designed with specific players in mind. Large, established corporations with vast legal and lobbying resources are far better equipped to navigate complex regulations, exploit loopholes, and even influence their creation. Smaller entities, local communities, or genuine grassroots environmental projects often lack the resources, political connections, or technical expertise to compete or even participate effectively in this heavily financialized and politically influenced market. This ensures that the benefits, both financial and reputational, flow upwards, consolidating power and wealth within the existing corporate structures. The cui bono lens reveals that the architects of these rules are also their primary beneficiaries. Furthermore, the narrative war plays a crucial role in legitimizing this captured system. The idea that the market knows best, that innovation will solve the problem, and that voluntary action is superior to heavy-handed regulation are powerful tropes. These narratives are carefully cultivated and disseminated by industry-funded media campaigns and think tanks. They serve to pacify public demand for stricter government intervention, creating a psychological acceptance of a system that is fundamentally rigged. The mass psychology expert recognizes this as a sophisticated form of gaslighting, where the public is convinced that a flawed, self-serving mechanism is actually an effective solution. The consequences of this regulatory capture extend beyond the mere financial inefficiencies of the carbon market. It actively undermines the global effort to combat climate change by creating a false sense of security and diverting attention and resources from genuinely impactful solutions. It perpetuates a system where polluting industries can continue their destructive practices, while simultaneously presenting themselves as environmental champions. It is a profound example of institutional decay, where the very structures meant to protect our collective future have been subverted to serve the narrow interests of a powerful few, leaving the planet and its most vulnerable populations to bear the true cost. The unintended consequences, climate change accelerating. We have systematically dissected the carbon credit market, exposing its foundations built on illusions, financial speculation, corporate greenwashing, and a global land grab facilitated by regulatory capture. Now, we must confront the most chilling aspect of this entire enterprise: its profound and often devastating unintended consequences, which are not merely failing to address climate change, but are actively contributing to its acceleration and the erosion of our collective capacity to respond. The most immediate and perhaps most damaging consequence is the diversion of focus and resources from real, verifiable, and impactful climate solutions. Imagine a global effort, a war against an existential threat. Instead of investing directly in the most effective weaponry, in strengthening defenses, or in developing breakthrough countertechnologies, a significant portion of our collective attention, political will, and financial capital is being channeled into a complex, often opaque, and demonstrably flawed system of offsets. The follow-the-money auditor sees this as a catastrophic misallocation of resources. Funds that could be driving the rapid build-out of renewable energy infrastructure, investing in energy storage, electrifying transportation, developing sustainable agriculture practices, or innovating in carbon capture technologies at the source, are instead being used to purchase cheap carbon credits. These credits, as we have detailed, frequently represent either non-additional reductions, overestimated impacts, or simply allow for continued pollution elsewhere. This is not a neutral act. It is an active hindrance. Every dollar spent on a dubious carbon credit is a dollar not spent on genuinely transformative change. Every hour policymakers spend debating the intricacies of carbon accounting is an hour not spent on implementing robust regulations for emissions reductions. This diversion of resources creates a drag on genuine progress, pushing back the timeline for necessary action, and ensuring that we remain firmly entrenched in a fossil fuel-dependent economy, albeit one with a carbon-neutral sticker. The institutional skeptic views this as a profound institutional failure, where the very mechanisms established to solve a crisis are instead perpetuating it through a sophisticated form of bureaucratic inertia and misdirection. This leads directly to the creation of a false sense of security regarding climate action. The narrative pushed by corporations and their political allies is one of progress. Companies proudly announce net zero by 2030 or carbon-neutral operations, often citing their extensive portfolio of purchased carbon credits. These announcements are widely reported by a media often unequipped or unwilling to scrutinize the underlying claims. The public, bombarded by these positive messages, is led to believe that the problem is being addressed, that solutions are in hand, and that the global effort is well on track. The mass psychology expert recognizes this as a classic tactic in the narrative war, a carefully constructed illusion designed to pacify public anxiety and diffuse pressure for more radical, disruptive change. This psychological comfort is dangerous. It breeds complacency, both among the general populace and within political circles. If the problem is perceived as being managed through market mechanisms, then the urgency for systemic governmental intervention, for stringent regulations, or for personal lifestyle changes diminishes. Why bother with difficult transitions if a simple financial transaction can magically erase emissions? This false sense of security allows governments to postpone unpopular but necessary policies, and it allows polluting industries to delay costly overhauls of their operations. The cui bono lens shows that this complacency directly benefits those who profit from the status quo, insulating them from the economic and political costs of genuine climate action. The planet, however, continues to warm, indifferent to our carefully constructed fictions. Perhaps the most insidious consequence is the moral hazard inherent in the entire carbon credit system. It incentivizes pollution rather than preventing it. A moral hazard arises when one party is protected from the risk of its actions, and another party bears the cost. In this case, polluters are effectively protected from the full environmental and social costs of their emissions. By allowing them to purchase offsets, the system creates a loophole, a legitimate pathway for them to continue emitting greenhouse gases. The cost of pollution is externalized, transferred to the communities hosting the offset projects, often the Global South, or simply deferred to future generations. If it is consistently cheaper and easier for a corporation to buy a carbon credit than it is to invest in actual emissions reduction technologies or processes, then the economic incentive is clear. The system, far from penalizing pollution, offers a mechanism to legitimize and perpetuate it. It transforms the act of emitting carbon from an environmental transgression into a financial transaction. This is a profound ethical inversion. Instead of an absolute imperative to reduce harm, we have created a market where the right to cause harm can be bought. The institutional skeptic argues that this is not merely a flaw, it is a fundamental perversion of justice, demonstrating a deep institutional decay where market logic has overridden ethical responsibility. The implications of this moral hazard are far-reaching. It undermines the very foundation of climate ethics, which demands that those who cause pollution bear the responsibility for mitigating it. Instead, it allows for a shifting of responsibility, both geographically and temporally. Moreover, it creates an environment where industries might even find it advantageous to increase their emissions in the short term, knowing they can offset them later, or to delay adopting cleaner technologies. The long-term consequences are clear. A slower, less effective transition to a low-carbon economy, and a continued escalation of global greenhouse gas concentrations. All these factors converge to create a frightening potential for systemic failure in the face of escalating climate events. We are witnessing an accelerating climate crisis, more frequent and intense heat waves, devastating floods, prolonged droughts, and rising sea levels. If our primary global response mechanism is built upon a foundation of dubious offsets, financial speculation, and greenwashing, then it is a house of cards. When the reality of insufficient emissions reductions collides with the undeniable physical impacts of climate change, the entire system could collapse. The narrative war will face its ultimate test. When the public finally grasps the extent to which they have been misled, that the promises of net zero were largely illusory, the resulting cynicism and loss of trust could be catastrophic. This breakdown of faith will not be confined to carbon markets. It will extend to governments, corporations, and international bodies that champion these flawed solutions. This institutional decay will leave us with a populace that is disillusioned, a political class that has lost its credibility, and an economic system that has failed to adapt. In such a scenario, rallying collective action for any effective solution, no matter how vital, will become exponentially more difficult. The carbon credit market, rather than being a clever solution, may well be one of the greatest distractions and failures of our time. It provides a convenient smokescreen, allowing the powerful to continue profiting while projecting an image of responsibility. But the planet does not negotiate with ledgers or public relations campaigns. It responds to physics. And as the planet's response intensifies, the true, devastating consequences of prioritizing financial gain and manufactured consent over genuine, transformative action will become tragically, undeniably clear. The path forward, deconstructing the carbon mirage. We have journeyed through the intricate layers of deception, financial exploitation, and institutional decay that define the current carbon credit market. We've seen how an initiative ostensibly designed to save our planet has become a sophisticated mechanism for profit, greenwashing, and the perpetuation of environmental injustice. The conclusion is inescapable. The carbon mirage, this elaborate illusion of climate action, is not merely failing. It is actively hindering our ability to confront the escalating climate crisis. So, if the current path is a dead end, what is the path forward? How do we deconstruct this mirage and pivot towards genuine, verifiable solutions? The first and most foundational step is an uncompromising insistence on genuine, verifiable emissions reductions. This means moving beyond the accounting tricks and the dubious offsets to focus on absolute, in-sector decarbonization. The emphasis must shift from compensating for pollution elsewhere to preventing pollution at its source. This requires hard targets, legally binding commitments, and rigorous, independent oversight that is not beholden to corporate interests. We need to measure actual tons of carbon asterisk, not emitted from a smokestack, not merely asterisk offset by a potentially questionable project thousands of miles away. This demands a radical overhaul of industrial practices, energy systems, and transportation networks. It means accelerating the transition to renewable energy sources, investing massively in energy efficiency, electrifying our infrastructure, and redesigning industrial processes to minimize waste and emissions. The follow-the-money auditor argues that the capital currently flowing into speculative carbon markets must be redirected to these tangible, transformative projects. This is not about market-based incentives for dubious offsets. It is about direct investment in the infrastructure of a truly sustainable future. The institutional skeptic insists that this transition cannot be left to the voluntary goodwill of corporations. It requires robust governmental policy, stringent regulations, and punitive measures for noncompliance, ensuring that the true cost of pollution is borne by the polluters themselves, not externalized onto society or the environment. Second, we must actively dismantle the current carbon market structure, particularly the voluntary offset markets that have proven to be a breeding ground for fraud and deception. The concept of offsets, as a license to pollute, has fundamentally undermined the integrity of climate action. Instead of allowing corporations to buy their way out of responsibility, we need systems that force direct reductions. If market mechanisms are to be retained at all, they must be transformed into robust, mandatory cap-and-trade systems with rapidly declining emissions caps, devoid of low-quality offsets, and governed by transparent, independent bodies free from regulatory capture. A genuine carbon pricing mechanism, such as a carbon tax, could be a more direct and transparent alternative, provided it is designed with equity in mind and implemented with verifiable impact. Such a tax would make pollution expensive, incentivizing industries to innovate and reduce emissions directly, rather than seeking cheap offsets. The revenues generated could then be reinvested in green technologies, supporting vulnerable communities, or even returned to citizens as a dividend, ensuring that the burden does not fall disproportionately on those least able to bear it. This would remove the speculative element that attracts financial institutions to the current carbon market, shifting the focus back to environmental outcomes. The cui bono lens here would demand that any new system demonstrably benefits the planet and its inhabitants, not merely a select few financial elites. Third, a critical shift in power is required. From distant financial institutions and multinational corporations to the communities on the front lines of climate change and environmental degradation. As we explored, the current system has facilitated a new wave of land grabs, dispossessing indigenous peoples and local communities under the guise of conservation. The path forward demands a reversal of this trend. This means recognizing and strengthening indigenous land rights, respecting customary land tenure, and ensuring that any land use decisions are made with the free, prior, and informed consent of the affected communities. Community-led conservation and restoration projects, where local populations are empowered as stewards of their own ecosystems, have a proven track record of success. These initiatives not only protect biodiversity and sequester carbon, but also foster sustainable livelihoods, preserve cultural heritage, and build local resilience. Funds must flow directly to these communities, bypassing the layers of intermediaries and speculative investors that currently extract value from these efforts. This is about decentralizing control, empowering local expertise, and ensuring that the benefits of environmental action accrue to those who bear the greatest burden of environmental harm. This is a direct counter to the institutional decay that has allowed the exploitation of vulnerable populations. Finally, and perhaps most crucially, we must reclaim the narrative from corporate interests. The narrative war has been waged effectively by those who profit from the status quo, creating a mirage of progress and a sense of public complacency. To deconstruct this mirage, we need an aggressive, truth-telling campaign that exposes greenwashing for what it is, a sophisticated form of deception. This means demanding absolute transparency from corporations regarding their actual emissions, their offset purchases, and the verifiable impact of those offsets. Investigative journalism and citizen oversight must be empowered and supported to scrutinize claims, audit projects, and hold polluters and their enablers accountable. The public needs to be educated, not merely informed, about the intricate mechanisms of climate finance, the influence of corporate lobbying, and the true efficacy of various climate solutions. The focus must shift from the comforting fiction of net zero by offsetting to the challenging but honest reality of real zero by fundamental transformation. The mass psychology expert understands that this requires breaking through years of carefully cultivated complacency and re-engaging the public with the urgency and scale of the climate crisis, but with a clear, actionable vision for genuine change. This reclaiming of the narrative also means challenging the underlying economic paradigms that have led us to this point. The relentless pursuit of infinite growth on a finite planet, the prioritization of short-term profit over long-term ecological stability, and the commodification of nature itself. These are the root causes that the carbon credit market merely reflects and exacerbates. The path forward requires a deeper, more systemic re-evaluation of our relationship with the natural world and with each other. It demands a commitment to global equity and justice, recognizing that climate change disproportionately impacts the most vulnerable, and that solutions must be built on principles of fairness and shared responsibility. Deconstructing the carbon mirage is not a simple task. It requires confronting powerful vested interests, challenging established institutions, and overcoming deeply ingrained psychological conditioning. But the alternative, continued reliance on a flawed system that accelerates our descent into climate chaos, is simply unacceptable. The time for illusions is over. The time for genuine, transformative action, guided by integrity, justice, and verifiable impact, is now.